Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. On today's podcast, we talk about something heavy, but something that must be acknowledged, which is how to deal with teens and tweens who are depressed. Today's podcast has someone who is very committed to working on this advocacy piece with parents, with professionals, so that they know how to access their teens and tweens' needs before it is too late. Chris did not have the ability to get connected in these ways, and his daughter was taken from him because of her depression. Chris now is changing the world one parent at a time, one workplace at a time, in hopes that we can have a better understanding about what depression truly is. He also shines a light and a legacy onto his beautiful daughter, Maddie. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today we have Chris Coulter on the podcast, who is not just an accomplished author. He's known for his book, Wake Up, You Could Lose Your Teen to Suicide. He's also now a passionate advocate for mental health and has delivered impactful keynote speeches at numerous conferences. He's been motivated by personal tragedy as he lost his daughter, Maddie, to suicide in April 2015. Chris was formerly the executive director of How Are You Feeling, a nonprofit organization focused on social emotional learning, helping children navigate and comprehend their emotions effectively. Chris is now the founder of Mentor Well, which is a youth mental health and mentorship organization he created after losing his daughter. The organization focuses on helping teens build confidence, resilience, and emotional intelligence before a crisis develops using a trusted mentor. Chris is also the founder of a parent support group that has expanded, which I like the way you spell this, Chris, when something feels off in school, SKOOL, and it's connecting parents around the world who may be concerned about what is going on with their teen and tween. But Chris, thank you so much for being here. I know that it was Maddie's birthday yesterday. Can we start off before we go into your advocacy work and how we can support others, just telling us a little bit about Maddie?
Sure. Thanks, Sharon. It's nice to be here. Yeah, Maddie would have been 26 yesterday. We lost her in April of 2015 when she was 14. From kind of April when we lost her to the end of her birthday, sandwiched in there is kind of my mom's birthday and Father's Day.
Oh, wow.
So it's a heavier period for me. So in some respects, I'm glad we're through the other side of it now.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm grateful just to be able to talk about Maddie. So Maddie was my firstborn. She was the first girl in, I think, kind of generations in the Coulter household. So she was revered as a small treasure. She literally was a small treasure. She was like 5.5 pounds when she was born.
Oh,
And I remember her looking up at me with these big brown eyes, and I was like, she had me. She had me the second she was staring at me.
she was wrapped around
Um,
your finger, huh?
yeah, yeah, I'm a total girl dad.
Mm-hmm.
But Maddie she was, I think when a lot of people conjure up feelings of or envision what someone who has depression or suicidal or someone who's died by suicide, people have a very different perspective. I think Maddie was popular. She was athletic. She was smart. She had a wicked sense of humor, this ruckus laugh. She could walk into a room and take it over. But she also was this incredibly kind person. And she was, even though she was popular, she didn't kind of submit or conform to the mean girl mentality or anything like that. She would prop up those who were struggling, who were maybe new to a foreign situation. And she just made people feel welcome. I'll give you a couple of examples if that's
Yes,
okay.
please do. Yeah.
So Maddie was new to grade 9, and she walked into her school, and it was like the hustle and bustle of high school between changing periods. And this girl who was also in grade 9 walked by her locker and dropped all of her books. Meanwhile, everyone's kind of like disregarding her, walking by. Maddie kind of took her aside, picked up her books, and just said to her, "How can I? Where's your next class? I'll walk you to your room." And I didn't hear about this until after Maddie passed. And this was some young woman who wasn't a friend of Maddie's. She just had been impacted by her kindness. And so she reached out to me after Maddie had passed and shared that story with me. And it just amplified the kindness that she always would show towards others. Another story which kind of is a really a tribute to her kindness. And after her first and second attempt, she was admitted into a youth mental health unit. It's a very stark and cold environment. It's very intimidating for children and for parents walking into this for the first time. And Maddie took it upon herself to be the unit greeter. She would walk up to a family when they first walked into the unit, and she'd go, "Hi, I'm Maddie. What's your name? Just want me to give you a tour." I think that just personifies the type of person she was. She was always sacrificing her light to give to others. And I think this is the thing I'm probably proudest about her and the type of person she was. There's a reason why her her name is as popular today as when she left, because she was loved and she was revered, and she's a focal point for families who assume that their children are okay, especially in North Toronto where I'm from. um, and it sent shockwaves through the community. And to this day, Maddie's, I guess her sphere of influence has widened dramatically, but she's making a difference every single day.
And she is, because here in New York City, I happen to follow Maddie's story. So I even found it here. And I realized that Maddie is just such a bright light. Just listening to you, she was just such a bright light. She remains a bright light. Her legacy still is a bright light. And when you speak about her, she just seems like such a gentle, kind soul, someone with a high level of emotional intelligence that was able to pick up on things, which a lot of people don't have that, unfortunately. And she can see, who's the person that's struggling, who's the person that is feeling down, and she would be the immediate person to be there to support that person. She didn't want anybody to feel bad. And this is where I think what you mentioned earlier, it gets a little tricky with mental health, with depression, anxiety, because you look at the shining bright light and depression doesn't necessarily come across as the word that you would use to describe a struggle she's having, which ties into the book that you said, Wake Up, You Could Lose Your Teen to Suicide. So it's interesting because I know a little bit about what people are getting wrong, but as a lived experience, what are people getting wrong when they look at their teens and tweens? They see them as a bubbly light and they're just missing certain things. What are some clues that they're missing that may be tied back to your book?
You know what? And it's not that there's a perfect formula for figuring it out, but I think I think people or parents, what they'll typically do if one of their child is exhibiting some sadness or pain, I think they automatically go, "Oh my gosh, my child is depressed," and they want to kind of, all right, book something with a therapist.
Right.
Or they are the opposite. They are dismissive and they go, you know what? It's just normal teenage behavior.
I've heard that, yeah.
And more people err on the judgment of dismissing it. We're human beings. We have emotions.
Of
And
course.
unfortunately, kids aren't taught about their emotions. It's something I wish our schools focused on it. And that was why I was executive director of that How Are You Feeling program because I believe that's so important in being able to self regulate and self identify what is going on. It's the challenge is over a sustained period of time. We all have our bad days, and let's acknowledge that right out of the gate. It's not if we have bad days, it's if it is sustained for more than a couple of weeks. So 2, 3, 4 weeks, that's when I think you have to be a little bit more aware as to what's going on with your child. There's probably something a little deeper that needs addressing. So the time frame, things typically like to spend more time in their room than when they want privacy, right? And are quick to jump in, go, oh, they just want more privacy, more independence, more autonomy. And same thing. It's fine to want additional privacy, but it's when it just becomes a little bit more extreme. Always in the room. They never come out of their room, or they cancel plans with friends, or they won't eat dinner with family. They'd rather take their meals into their room. Disrupted sleep patterns, disrupted eating patterns, or eating too much, or eating too little, or sleeping too little, or sleeping too much. There's also huge spikes in schoolwork. It could be a rapid decline as far as how they're doing, or in some cases, some kids, because they want to kind of wear that mask, they will double down and increase their academic focus to become more of a almost a perfectionist type of approach. And kids tend to wear a mask because they don't want to burden us as parents with the weight they're carrying. So they do a lot of this stuff to protect us. But other things, like Maddie as an example, she was a competitive swimmer, and and she excelled in the pool from a very early age. One day I could just feel she was she was fighting the water in the pool. She was at a 2-day meet and we were at day 1, and she always tended to be on the podium in her races. For the first time ever, she didn't podium in her races. And after the first day, she came to me, she said, "Dad, do I have to go tomorrow?" And I gave her a pass. And part of that was I I I was a single dad. Their mother was in Europe half of the time, so I was doing a lot of this heavy lifting myself, and I was also coaching my boys' hockey, both their hockey teams. And sometimes you'll take the pass because it's the course of least resistance, and
Yes.
sometimes you're just exhausted.
Yeah.
I spent so much time traveling with all of the kids that, you know what, when she said that, I said, "Okay, sure." Unfortunately, that was the last time she actually swam competitively. So she elected not to go back to swimming. And I truly believe that some purposeful physical activity, or any activity for that matter, is so important for kids and their mental health. Even if I'd said, you know what? Sure, you're in the pool 8 days a week. Why don't we just maybe we'll knock it down to maybe 3 or 4, where there's still that exercise element, which quite frankly is the best antidepressant that there is. So I think parents who are succumbing to their kids' wishes about not wanting to continue an activity, when kids start to cancel the stuff out of their lives that they really once upon a time really empowered them, really were passionate about, and all of a sudden they start quitting, that's another component that is really important to be able to identify. That is a red flag when they start wanting to not do the stuff they used to love. I think I identified 7, but you could probably argue there's 27. But there are so many things that we just need to be more hyper vigilant as opposed to dismissive.
Yeah, I think that's really important because as someone who's worked with teens and tweens, and we all once upon a time were a teen and tween, I see that oftentimes it is really hard for parents to listen to their child suffering, and sometimes they just want to ignore it and like say, oh, this is a phase, you'll outgrow it. And you mentioned you talk about that a lot in a lot of your work. Or on the flip side, it's kind of like, okay, let's go into this, let's try to fix this immediately and see what comes out of it. But I think you mentioned something really important, which is this over pathologizing of feeling sad, where depression is so confusing because people think that, okay, you feel sad for a little bit, something's going on in school or something might be happening at work as an adult, and you're upset. And you might even feel depressed, but that's not clinical depression. And I think that's also a confusing thing, especially during the teen and tween years when everyone's trying to figure out their identity and where they belong and might be going through periods where they're upset. But like you said, this is periods of time where you're self isolating, where you're not doing the things that you love anymore, where you're somebody who is maybe oversleeping constantly or not sleeping, like eating changes are constantly happening. It seems like a mix of a lot of things. And you probably, as a parent, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but you may feel something internally, like something is off, as you write about in your book. Something feels off, right? Usually?
Yeah, it is. It's a gut feeling we have as parents that I think is instinctive, and it's instinctive for a reason. And I think parents tend to dismiss that feeling and we tend to rationalize. And whether that is because there's a stigma or a judgment aspect of other parents, if we say our child is struggling, is that a reflection on us and what we're doing incorrectly as parents? I don't know. But I think we do tend to dismiss more quickly than we tend to accept there might be something wrong. And that's why I created this tool called the Teen Signal Check. And it's an awareness tool for parents. And it's funny, it's had more than 11,000 parents have used this.
Wow.
I launched it about 4 months ago, and it's 14 questions. It's gender specific because the nuances between boys and girls, it can be different.
Huge, huge.
It is different. And what they do is they go through, answer these questions, and it gives them a score. It comes out green, yellow, or red. Green means good for now, but don't say you're safe for good. Yellow is kind of caution. There's something happening there. Pay attention. And red is, you know what? You need to be more vigilant and take some actions. And so when they do this, it identifies that gut in their feeling that they either verify something's off or at least it helps them to have a certain amount of clarity and peace of mind. And so I'm proud of the fact that 11,000 parents have taken it and have questioned whether they should be dismissing or trusting that feeling in their gut that tells them something is off. And it's interesting the numbers, about 50% of the people who take the test, and this is a sample size, it's 11,000 now. 50% are green, about 30% are yellow, and 20% are red. Of the 50% of the people who have taken it, half of those people are probably going, wow, I was dismissing something and now I'm more aware of it. And so there's a supplemental guide that gives them additional resources and a course that a course of action that they should take. And so from that standpoint, I just I'm just really happy parents are paying more attention. And whether it's because it's an easy tool to use, it takes 3 minutes, it's free, but it also is something that I think we're pushing them to actually feel uncomfortable because I think as a parent, it is hard to even know or see or acknowledge that your child is struggling. And I think that's why a lot of parents dismiss it because they just will rationalize it as a phase and that it will pass.
Yeah. But I think that's great with the color system, just keeping it so simple and basic so that, nobody has to over explain or go into the nitty gritty of the details, but just actually just think about what their gut is telling, like you were saying, like let your gut guide you. And in so doing, you have woken up a lot of parents and a lot of people around the world. Chris, I feel like you're just so courageous. And it's so hard because I've spoken to parents who have lost children, and it's not the same for everybody. Everybody goes through a different experience. Some people just want to just be left alone for the rest of their lives and just, be in peace, in their form of peace. And then others like you feel this rise to action, this call to action, and you're impacting so many people like around the world, and you're trying to prevent the crisis from happening. You're trying to intervene and mentor in the moment before something becomes a crisis. But Chris, you were a person before Maddie passed, and now you're Chris post Maddie's passing. I'm just curious for all the parents out there and teens that are listening, how do you see yourself now being this huge advocate and trying to impact everybody, this new life that you have versus the Chris that was before? Or do you still see yourself as the same?
No, I see myself very different. In fact, it was probably a realization I came to about a year or so ago. It was after Maddie passed, and I should preface it that saying, after Maddie passed, I went through, other than kind of writing teen advocacy and parent advocacy, I was really largely unfunctionable for 5 years, and then the second 5 years was a little bit better. The brain fog starts to lift, but the impact it has upon your brain, your ability to make decisions and think clearly, memory loss. I went to my doctor and I went, "Doc, I think I've got adult ADHD." And he said, "Chris, you don't have adult ADHD. You're dealing with a lot of stress, but you're also dealing with traumatic loss."
Hmm.
And traumatic loss manifests itself in many of the same ways. So, but going back to your question, Sharon, as far as who I was, I was always trying to get back to that person I was before Maddie's loss. I w- I was I was I was a good decision maker. I was, I wouldn't say I was ruthless, but I was certainly a lot more kind of disciplined, more matter of fact. I don't think I had the degree of empathy or compassion that I had. I I don't think I was as kind as I've become, and it's hard to say that being who I am today. But when I came to that realization, I was not meant to get back to that person. I was supposed to embrace the person I've become. Not only did it kind of allow me to move forward, my relationship with Maddie, with that distinction, helped to change my relationship with her. And Maddie became someone who wasn't just a sad story. It wasn't just a loss of a child, but that's when the advocacy kind of took off. That's where it became really important to start advocating for not only Maddie, but for other kids and other families. Because at the end of the day, I never want another family to endure the heartache and loss that our family has gone through. So to answer your question, yeah, I think I've changed quite a bit,
Yeah.
but I'd like to think I changed for the better.
Well, you seem like a great guy, and even just reading through everything, it seems like you are just an amazing father to this day. I know you have two boys who are now grown up, Sawyer and Zach. So yeah, so in all of this, how are they doing today, and what were their steps in trying to navigate this, and you being a single father to three children?
Yeah, it's a to say that divorce doesn't impact your kids. I think Maddie's largest impact, I believe, was how she navigated or what kind of position she was put in during our divorce. And that was tough. It weighed on her. We tend to say kids are resilient.
Mm,
They'll get over it.
yeah.
Well, you know what? They're really fragile, especially when they haven't been taught a lot about emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I truly believe that that was the single largest impact on Maddie and what led to her depression. Yeah, there was a culmination of lots of other things as well. But my boys, considering Zach was 13, 13 at the time. Sawyer, I think, was 8 or 9 when we lost Maddie. They were young. And Zach is a special kid. He and Maddie were exceptionally close, kind of each other's confidants and best friends. And so Zach was really impacted. Not that Sawyer wasn't, but like probably a month after Maddie passed, Zach asked if he could move into Maddie's room to be closer with her. And which of course I honored. His mom started up something called the Maddie Project. And Zach, as part of that, spoke to thousands of kids at the high school level talking about empathy and compassion and how to be a supportive friend and how to identify when your friends might be struggling and how to approach them. And so he did that. And Zach is not someone who is a kind of outwardly exuberant extrovert. He's a quiet, confident
Mhm.
kid. So for him to put himself outside his comfort zone, he did that to honor his sister. And I think it was cathartic for him, but also, and I asked him this about a year or so ago. I said, Zach, do you think you properly grieved Maddie's death? Because he was basically thrown into this speaking engagement.
Yeah.
A lot of it was at the urging of his mom, but also he wanted to do it. And he said, I don't think I did properly. But today he's also a mentor within the mentor well, but he also was a mentor for kids who have lost other significant family members. He has been he's just a kind, good person. And he's doing Maddie's work in Maddie's absence.
That's so beautiful, actually. I mean, I it's interesting what you say of how he just kind of started the speaking engagements and he was so busy with them that he didn't even have maybe time to grieve, and I feel like that's one way, right, to cope with the hardships of everything. When I speak to people, they say they've gotten busy with things and they have a purpose, this larger purpose that is kind of fueling them, that's allowing them to cope just a little bit better as hard as it may be, especially in Zach's case where he was best friends with Maddie. This wasn't just siblings. These were best friends, confidants, critical ages, and he just was just running around doing these engagements to help. And you said also a mentor within Mentor Well. So I think that there is something powerful in finding that purpose. So speaking about purpose, a lot of times people will say that individuals who are depressed, who are teens and tweens, or even adults, are missing this purpose or missing a connection. They're not connected to other people in some way, or other people aren't connecting with them, and that's what they really just need to get through it, this purpose, this connection. And so what would you say to that, to parents who feel like, okay, I just need to get my kid connected a little bit more?
Well, I think yes. I'm in the midst of reading this book called The Anxious Generation,
Yeah.
which is brilliant. And it talks about the advent of smartphone and social media and the
Mhm.
impact it's had on kids. So it's a
Right.
brilliant book. So anyone that thinks that social media and their smartphones doesn't impact their kids should look at that.
Mhm.
As far as, and sorry, what was the first part of your question, Sharon?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a speech pathologist, so I have a lot of parts to questions. I just could keep going. But no, just in terms of a lot of people think, this purpose, this connection, the one that Zach found after Maddie's death, right, is sometimes a buffer to some of the consequences of depression, or maybe can prevent some of aspects of the depression. And obviously, connection is harder these days because of social media or in-person connection. Or it sounded like Maddie did have a real passion, which was swimming and other things. But to the parents that are questioning, oh, how do I connect my child, or how do I create a purpose for them? Like, how could that work?
I don't think you can create a purpose for them. Find out what they like, get them to experience as many things as possible, and find out what they love to do, and encourage it. Yeah, encourage them to get off their phones, get out and actually play. It's such a lost I'll call it a lost art. And it's so important in the development of who these kids are and who they become. Connection is absolutely critical. But as far as purpose is concerned, I think purpose, a lot of kids who are depressed, a lot of kids who die by suicide or have suicidal ideation, people think they're like the down and out, those who are really depressed, can't get out of bed. Often it's the really high functioning kids who are very purposeful, who are very driven. They're like the type A personalities that have all these aspirations and goals. And so a lot of parents will tend to dismiss those kids who are hypersocial or who are overachievers as, oh, you know what, they're fine, they're functioning, they seem to have a lot of purpose. And purpose does drive happiness for sure. But if something turns south and if they don't have the capacity, the understanding to be able to self-regulate, to be self-aware,
Hmm.
it's really important, I believe, to be able to help them figure out a way through. So, yeah, just because your child looks on the outside that they are fine, they often wear a mask. Going back to what I said earlier, that they don't want to burden us with the weight of their sadness or lack of purpose or whatever what it is that they're challenged with at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think and you speak to this a lot about the feeling of burdening someone and how that could also set people down a road of, I feel like a burden on others. I feel like people are doing too much work for me. I'm impacting my family negatively. All these thoughts that teens have because of the struggle they're having. And I think part of it is also because physical and mental health are also viewed differently, which is a whole other topic, which they're two separate things, but to me, I view them as the same just because of my own experiences. Physical, you have a chronic or an acute physical illness. Well, what if you have a chronic mental health or an acute mental health issue? Those are the same things in my opinion again.
I
And
agree.
so I think that's something that's missing in the way that we have come far in terms of this, I feel like, because I remember when I was 14 years old and I saw a psychologist, I remember that I had to literally go into this bathroom before the other patient came. Granted, I grew up in a sheltered community where it was even more taboo because if somebody knows that you are dealing with something, I don't know, that could impact your whole family, but I had to literally hide in a bathroom so that the patient can come in so we wouldn't see each other so I could leave. And that to me, like as a teenager, that really hurt me because I felt like in that moment, like, wow, I'm really a mess up. Like I'm really someone who should be embarrassed, humiliated. There's something really, really wrong with me deeper than what I even know. And now it seems like we've come a long way. Maybe those things aren't happening as frequently, and maybe we're having a greater understanding about mental health. Yet at the same time, we see that mental health challenges are pretty high. There's still a stigma on this. And so when you work with these families, because you have the parent support groups and you're mentoring all these families, do you find that some of them are still responding to a stigma and therefore they're shying away from some of the expression of it?
Yeah, I think there still is a shame associated with it. As far as I think societally, I think we accept, yes, mental health is a challenge. I think when you kind of when you narrow it down and you talk about it from an individual perspective, I think we can accept it societally, but individually putting your hand up
Uh,
and saying, I have a problem, I'm depressed, I think that is where the challenge still exists. I think when we can get to a place in time where, you know what, I'm taking a day off because I'm feeling really, really terrible is accepted as much as I have the flu. That's where we need to get to. And I think that's where we need to kind of acknowledge where the room for improvement needs to take place.
Yeah, and just thinking about the workplace, we're definitely not there yet because sometimes people do need mental health days, and it could be a chronic thing that's flaring up and they need to take the day off, but it's always the message push through, push through, push through, because it's viewed again differently than physical. Like if someone has the flu, okay, take off 5 days. We don't want you here. You're contagious and this is a real thing. Whereas it's not considered real if you take off because emotionally you feel sick.
And that's where my work has kind of evolved to as well. So when I started up the mentorship piece, the challenge was so many parents would come to me and go, "Oh, my child won't see a therapist, but I could convince them to see a mentor." And I went, "Well, we're not a replacement for therapy.
Right,
If your
right.
child needs therapy, they need therapy." As I like to say, we're a bridge between parenting and therapy, but
Mhm.
we're not a replacement. And so when I had this almost like this epidemic of parents coming to me too late, I said, I've got to get further upstream. I've got to get to parents to make them more aware. And so one thing that happened over the course of the last 10 years, because of my writing and because of my vulnerability, I shared a lot of stuff. And now I've talked to more than 2,500 parents who have reached out to me because of the stuff that I write about, and largely because of what they're going through with their child. Three questions became more apparent than any others. One, is my child struggling or is this normal teenage behavior? Two is, how do I talk to my child without shutting them down? And three, if I need mental health resources, where can I go to get them? So I thought about the nature of those discussions and we needed to get further upstream. And so that's where I went to the corporations and I said, how about if I conduct parent workshops? And the foundation for it are those three questions, three 1 hour sessions, half-hour presentation, half-hour Q&A. And
Mhm.
what became more compelling for corporations was the fact that 1 in 4 working parents are dealing with a child who is emotionally struggling. And
Wow.
if you look at the average corporation is made up of about 60 to 70% parents, that translates into 1 in 7 employees, or almost 15%. So we're not talking about a small sample size here.
No.
So that's I now go in and I conduct these parent workshops to help parents. I started off by doing that teen signal check, which
Right.
kind of gets them into the flow. And then I go through and talk about what if is their child struggling or is this normal stuff? And then the second session is talking about communication strategies with your kid. Because as parents, what do we tend to do? Our kids open up
Yeah.
and we tend to jump into fix it mode or advice
Right.
giving mode, which is a surefire way of shutting our kids down. And so I get asked the question, how do I get my kids to open up to me? And I go, well, just try shutting your mouth for a little while. I go through and customize these lists of mental health resources that are internationally or geographically available. So it's taken on on that corporate aspect of things. The other thing that's very, very interesting is the relationship. There's a very similar dynamic between parents and their kids and managers and their employees. And if we've got more than 40% of employees are dealing with something emotionally heavy right now, whether it's navigating a divorce, financial struggles, having a child who's struggling emotionally, dealing with elderly parents, could be addiction, it could be a physical or mental illness. And someone told me this, they said, how about menopausal and perimenopausal? And often it's not just one thing that's happening, it's often compounding effect, it's often layered on top of one another. And so most managers have never been trained, A, to identify, and B, to be able to have those conversations with their employees. And so I created On the heels of the teen signal check, I created this thing called the workplace signal check, which is helps managers identify blind spots within their team. And so how to identify when they've got an employee who's struggling, and then how to have those conversations with their employees that are compassionate and warm and inviting, and make them glad that they actually are having that conversation, as opposed to, I wish I never walked into my manager and told them what was going on. And the financial impact on corporations is massive,
In terms of
not
the
only
mental
from
health?
a absenteeism, from a
Yeah.
presenteeism, from a productivity standpoint. But this is the big number, is the retention aspect. If someone feels like they made a mistake, or they are not safe in this location, or in this job, they will quietly try to find out try to find another safer location to go work. And when the cost of replacing one employee is between 50 to 200% of that individual's salary, it doesn't take long before all of a sudden you've got this massive financial challenge that you're dealing with as well. So I'm now having corporate opportunities. So yes, it's helping parents delivered through.
I think this is brilliant.
Thank you.
No, no, because this is brilliant because you're coming in and you're training employers too from an employer-employee relationship, but you're also coming in and saying, okay, you're also parents, right? So as a parent, how would you handle your teen and tween? And then it's basically them having to think about, well, if I'm a parent and my teen or tween or child is struggling, well, what about as an employer? So they're forced to transfer it over whether they want to or not. So it's kind of like almost indirect forced application. It's a wonderful strategy.
Well, it's just, sometimes I have my good days. It's all emotionally intelligence based, right? Which is something that it should be more common than it is. But we
Mhm.
all know that emotional intelligence is lacking everywhere in the world.
EQ is underestimated. I think that IQ is focused on a lot more, just even in working with, individuals that have a lot of social emotional needs, and, I look around and sometimes I wonder, maybe the people who are saying that they're so emotionally intelligent sometimes are not really the ones that are. So,
Yeah,
that's a I don't
yeah.
know.
You know what? It's like someone say, "I'm really smart. Just ask me." So
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right, I'm so self-aware, like, I'm just so incredibly self-aware, you know?
I'm so
But that's
humble. I'm
yeah,
so
exactly.
humble.
So, yeah, I mean, so confident, right? But, yeah, I mean, so, yeah, that's an interesting way of doing it, but you said, like, safety is really a big thing, safety, and I think it's for our teens, it was, for Maddie, for all the Maddies out there that are in those years, not that Maddie's at that age anymore, but her legacy lives on from that point, and feeling safe is something that I have struggled with in a workplace before, and I got out of that, to your point. When a place becomes toxic and then severely impacts your mental health and you feel unsafe, you feel like at any point your boss is going to say something to you or come after you, or it's very triggering. And I hate that word triggering because it's overused and Gen Alpha, Gen Z use it too much. But that safety, that yearning for to feel like you're okay and you're not going to like have to look over your shoulder every second. And then also carrying it over to our young Maddies of the world who need to feel safe, right? So in the schools, I don't know. I know that's something that you also work with, right? The schools and trying to figure out safety over there. Yeah.
I did work with schools. In particular, I set up programs when I was running How Are You Feeling? I
Hmm.
got really frustrated because
Okay.
of the indifference
Hmm.
that I found, whether it was public or private. And I truly believe it comes down. It's a liability issue, because they still hold on to the premise that if you mention the word suicide, that will cause someone to suicide.
That's not true
It's
though.
it's not. There's a 40% chance that mentioning or asking someone if they feel suicidal or feeling like they're going to self harm, there's a 40% chance of reducing that from happening. However, by not mentioning it within the ranks of the schools, they'll throw all sorts of money at counselors if someone dies by suicide in a school, then and all the response teams. We need to get further upstream with regards to schools. That is a bigger issue for another day. And
Yeah.
maybe when I get everything with mentor well to a point where I feel I've got more bandwidth, that's probably would be my next line of attack, but making
Yeah.
schools more accountable for what they're doing or what they're not doing to prepare our kids emotionally for life.
Yeah, and then we'll have our part 2 about that because again, this is something that I joined the school system in 2011 with, after graduate school, rose-colored glasses. I mean, I was always cynical, so it's just how I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. But at the same time, I still had this kind of, okay, like, this is the way things work in school. And I was always, I'm not going to say emotionally intelligent, but I was always attuned just because of my own struggles to the struggles of others. And I started noticing that what I thought was, let's say, counselors. Like I thought counselors were the go to people to go to if someone had a mental health struggle or if I was picking up on something that maybe was a little bit off. And then I realized that the counselor's role in a school is not to be a therapist. Their goal is to monitor just in general, like at least here in New York City, attendance, just like basic functioning. Is the student getting to any behavioral challenges? And then during COVID, which we didn't even touch upon, it really hit a peak because I was working in a Title I school, which is 60% are below the poverty line. And then they were dealing with COVID in their 4x4 apartments and feeling very isolated, and their communities got hit even harder. And when I would talk to the counselors about it, they just didn't have the bandwidth or the support to actually work with these students and help them. Instead, the best they could do is refer them out to a therapist, which is what I finally concluded, which is that we don't have in-house therapists in the schools. And so people think that the guidance counselors are the ones that are going to be supporting from a social emotional perspective, but no, it's really outside therapy. And then in outside therapy, there's also some complications that I've noticed as well, which is that how do you find a good therapist, right? So it's very complicated.
Yeah, it's not cut and dry. And US is obviously a different healthcare system than in
Yes.
Canada. We're feeling the the strain of the mental health crisis as well. It takes, especially for a child, to be able to get to a proper diagnosis and to be put before a the right practitioner.
Yes.
It can take months. And it's not uncommon to be upwards of 6 months. Well, you can imagine if someone is in crisis and then they've got a 6 month waiting list to be able to navigate. Your mental health is not getting better in the interim.
No.
And it seems to be such a common seems to be such a commonality now. And I'm talking because talking to people all over the world, it is very common throughout the world. A lot are dealing with this. Yes, you know what? There's the physical aspect which people are on top of for the most part, or there might be paid practitioners you can go to, but the mental health aspect is still a struggle. And that's where I think we need grit in that
Yeah.
regard.
Major support. And I mean, the landscape here is fascinating because, yes, it is different because we don't have universal health care like you do in Canada, right? So then one would think that, okay, maybe the wait lists aren't as long, right? Because over there you have wait lists pretty much for every doctor, right? I believe like it's just hard sometimes.
It depends.
Yeah.
Not all practitioners fall within the universal health care. So,
Right.
from a mental health standpoint, yes, your GP is covered, and
Okay.
a psychiatrist is covered. However, psychologists and psychotherapists, they are not covered. That is an out of pocket expense.
Right.
That can be supplemented by employee benefits. But if you don't have access to employee benefits, then you're out of pocket for that.
So it's not that different. And one thing that came out of COVID was a huge problem, which I observe as a problem, which is that Now, so many other people were seeking out therapy due to what was going on during COVID and how it impacted them, that now any individual that graduates from any school or any title that is remotely related to therapy is now able to charge like an arm and a leg. So it's just become something that also is very hard to access. Whereas, like prior to COVID, I found like, okay, at least during that time, you would show up, they would play music in the office, you would feel kind of comforted by other people sitting in an office. And now there's this whole remote movement, which I don't think works for a lot of people. Again, in my humble opinion, sometimes it's good to see the person in person, like to actually pick up on what's going on. But no, I mean, it's become like a really, really hard to access good therapy now because of this whole thing. So I think on some level, even though there are differences between where you are in Ontario and here in New York, like it's kind of unfortunately met the same point in terms
Yeah,
of,
with regards to mental health, to a large extent, it is.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So, I mean, before we log off, I just want to ask you, in dealing with all these, all these ways of advocacy and working with all these different people, from employers to parents, what is one message that you feel like you could speak to in memory of Maddie, as it was her birthday yesterday, that you feel like even maybe through Maddie, like maybe Maddie would say something like this, that you could really send through Maddie's light to other parents around the world?
I think we have to listen to the true messaging from what our kids tell us, and when they choose to open up and share what's going on in their mind. And I'll share something that someone by the name of Kevin Hines shared with me about a year and a half ago, and I use this all the time. Sometimes I give him credit, sometimes I take it from myself.
Okay.
But as far as when your child comes and starts talking to you, and often there is an inclination to want to jump in to fix it or
Mhm.
advice giving mode, resist that urge. And if you do feel the urge, if you can't sit on your hands or sit with your mouth closed, then ask this question: is this a fix it or a feel it conversation? Your child, 90% of the time, will only want you to listen. 90% of the time, parents want to fix. So you can see that there's this huge disconnect. But when you ask that and you allow your child to answer it, and as long as you respect what they say, don't say, is this a fix it or feel it conversation? Oh, you only want me to lean in and listen? Okay, let me just say this first, though, okay? That and you know what? I'm sure there are parents who I've told them this, and they will still insist on talking. But I think the important thing is allow them to share, because sharing and us not jumping in not only increases and betters our relationship with our kids, but it also builds trust. And
Mhm.
I think the other thing is encourage your kids to have relationships, safe relationships with other adult figures outside of as parents, because your kids will not share with you everything you think they will. They go, "Oh, I have a really great relationship. My kid tells me everything." And I go, "No, they don't." So if you have an aunt or an uncle or a neighbor or a coach or a mentor, then you know what? Encourage those relationships. Kids need trusting adult relationships to be able to lean on, to be able to share with, because if they don't share with them, then they are keeping a lot of it they're suppressing inside. And that's where that silence all of a sudden starts to become overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that's such a great note to leave off on, which is fighting the urge, because we all have urges. And as parents, also, the urge is there to just, like you said, fix it. And also the urge to not shut up is so hard. But finding safety in others too, and maybe encouraging that, because I think also parents, and Chris, tell me if this is accurate, sometimes don't necessarily want their child being 100% vulnerable with another adult. They'd rather the child come to them for
Yeah.
their challenges.
And the problem is that really comes down to the psychologically safe environment that they have created for their child to share. And if they haven't, then they will go elsewhere. And sometimes they'll go online, they'll talk to friends. But what you want to do is encourage them to at least talk. And you know what? If a therapist is warranted, then great. If they'll see a therapist.
Right.
And that's where I saw a mentor, and the creation of the mentor well was intended to give a non-judgmental, listen first place for kids to be able to share lived experiences with someone else
Yeah.
without feeling judged, without being criticized, and without jumping into advice and fix it mode.
Right. Wow, Chris, what you've done has been absolutely like amazing. And it's just the way you took this pain. And I know that there was a bump in the road where you had to actually grieve. And then after this ongoing grieving, I know that it doesn't end. You just kind of rose into action and have supported parents all around the world because you don't want any situation like this to happen to anybody else. I just think is it just speaks volumes about who you are now. I don't know who you were before. I'm sure you were great back then as well, but it just speaks volumes to your character and what? But not to No, but it just speaks volumes, and I think you can help so many people, even whoever listens to this podcast. A lot of neurodivergent individuals listen to this podcast as well, who are masking, and the families are trying to figure out, what's going on in terms of other mental health struggles that are happening because they feel isolated and not really belonging. But yeah, you've been just very vulnerable, raw, and real, which I think more people need to be, and maybe this is how we can continue to solve this. So for anybody listening, you have your mental well program. You have also your program where you're supporting parents. So I'm going to put this in my show notes, but just if you want to just verbally tell us where everybody can find all those stations where you're at.
Sure. My website houses my blog, which a lot of people subscribe to. It's also where you can get access to the teen signal check. Called the mentorwell, thementorwell.com. And you can, if you're a parent in need of in need of support, and support not necessarily from a therapy standpoint, but just having other parents going through something similarly, because there is that feeling of isolation,
Yeah.
and just others who can feel that they just, wow, this person really gets me. It's something in the school program, SKOOL, a school platform. And my group is called When Something Feels Off. And
Okay.
you can also access that through my website as well. So
Okay. All right. So there are a lot of resources that you have, and everybody can connect with you quite easily if they need support. But thank you again, Chris, for this conversation. And I think it's going to help a lot of people.
thanks, Sharon.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.